engage with this coronavirus, and they have initiated this conference. This is our second Iranian community's online conference participated by international figures, and thanks to all Ashraf residents and others from 1,000 different parts of the world participating in this conference, and some participating through social media. Let me thank our
distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us in our virtual conference to discuss the COVID-19 crisis in Iran and the regime's fear of nationwide uprisings. I'm pleased to be given the chance to join you today as the moderator of today's event, the second conference of its kind being held by the Iranian diaspora and the Iranian community abroad. I'm thrilled to announce that we've been able to connect over 1,000 people from different locations throughout the globe in this conference today. And we have thousands tuning in to our event, which is being broadcasted live on social media via Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. عنوان جلسه امروز بحران کرونا ویروس در ایران، وحشت رژیم از قیام مردم هستش. و هدف
The name of this event is the study of the coronavirus and its impact on Iran. And so far, up to now, 30,700 people have died of coronavirus, and Iranians are simultaneously suffering not only from coronavirus, but also the Iranian regime, who is worse than coronavirus. The Iranian regime is desperately concerned with the popular discontent and uprising, and we ask you to, the whole community, to hear the sufferings of the Iranian people who are facing religious fascism. As the leader of the Iranian resistance stated, the tic-tac of the uprising and the overthrow of the regime is today we have Mr. Tony Jones, Bob Blackman, Toby Perkins, and Madam Nourouzi is also participating in this event. We have invited Madam Talan and Khorram Rudi to give their speech. Let me introduce our first speaker, Mr. David Jones, member of the Parliament from the United Kingdom.
To begin our program today with a great friend of the Iranian people in the quest for freedom, the Right Honorable David Jones. The mic is yours.
Well, thank you for that kind introduction, and it's a great pleasure to be joining you here from North Wales. But we're living in strange and sad times, and as we meet, the entire world is reeling from the effects of the coronavirus outbreak. Governments across the world have adopted measures to prevent the virus from spreading, treating the infected and doing whatever they can to preserve the lives of the rest of their people. And they're having to take hard decisions and accept that those decisions may well cause great economic damage to their own countries. It's not an easy time for world leaders. Now, the response to the virus of most of the Western countries has followed a pattern. Protect the lives of your citizens by encouraging social distancing and the shielding of the most vulnerable, and treat those citizens as adults, explaining the severity of the outbreak and not downplaying the threat to life posed by this dreadful virus. However, there is one government that is not following this pattern, and that is the Iranian regime. And it's very clear from respected sources, including the BBC, that Tehran suppressed and downplayed the news of the spread of the virus in Iran for several weeks. And it's fairly clear that they did so, among other reasons, because of their desire to continue with the rallies marking the 41st anniversary of the 1979 revolution and to hold their discredited elections. They continued to allow air flights to and from China, and they declined to quarantine the infected city of Qum. Since the beginning of the pandemic in Iran, the regime at its highest level, from the supreme leader Ali Khamenei down, have attempted to distance themselves from the disastrous consequences of the pandemic. They downplayed the appalling impact of the virus as it spread across the country, and they tried to convince the Iranian people that both preparation and response were well in hand. The actions and the inactions of the regime, however, have in fact worsened the impact of the pandemic, with the consequences we've just heard, that more than 30,000 Iranians have died. And to make matters worse, the regime has sought to use the catastrophe of the epidemic as an excuse to dismantle international sanctions. Its foreign minister and its chief apologist, Javad Zarif, has contended that because of sanctions, Iranian medical staff cannot treat patients and protect themselves. However, in contradiction of Mr. Zarif, other officials of the regime, including the health minister, have said on several occasions that they do not need any more equipment or assistance to fight against coronavirus. Indeed, the regime also refused to permit the organization Médecins Sans Frontières to set up a temporary hospital in Isfahan after previously saying that it could proceed. Colleagues, it's impossible to believe that any government that really cared about the well-being of its people could behave in such a manner. And this is just the most recent manifestation of the lack of concern for human life on the part of those who rule Iran. In November and December of last year, according to Reuters and other news outlets, they presided over the killing of some 1,500 unarmed protesters across the country. On the 8th of January this year, they shot down a Ukrainian civil airliner. And it's becoming increasingly clear that the only thing that the regime really cares about is holding on to power, which they are quite prepared to do at the expense of their own people. Now, despite all the humanitarian aid that has been offered to them, and they have rejected, they're seeking $5 billion from the International Monetary Fund. And it's fairly certain that that money, if paid, would be invested in the sponsorship of subversive militia groups in Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen. And it would also undoubtedly be invested in the continued internal suppression of the Iranian people. It's abundantly clear that the money that the regime says it needs to save lives would in fact be used in bringing more death and destruction to its own people and to the people of the wider region. There is an old saying that goes, "Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me." Similarly, shame on the international community if it is again fooled by the regime in Tehran, which is quite simply cynically using the current plight of its own people, who are its principal victims, as an excuse to fund its terror network throughout the region, a network that has been responsible, among other things, for the deaths of British soldiers in Iraq. Far from supplying the regime in Tehran with more money, the British government and other Western governments should be imposing sanctions on that regime and its affiliated groups. We should not be financing a regime that murders its own people and wages illegal proxy war throughout the Middle East. Rather, we should support the wish of the Iranian people to be free once again. And in that regard, we should give support to the only legitimate democratic opposition in Iran, the NCRI, and the 10-point plan of Madam Mariam Rajavi, which I believe offers the best hope of restoring to the Iranian people the freedom that they so clearly and so understandably desire. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jones. As you rightly mentioned, the issue here isn't the lack of equipment or funding. This is a regime where human lives have no value, and that's the core problem. And crimes perpetrated in this regard are nothing short of crime against humanity, as you mentioned. در این قسمت از برنامه از آقای اوتو برنهارت از اعضای هیئت رئیسه بنیاد کنراد آدناور.
We are now asking Mr. Otto Bernhardt, a former member of Bundestag from Germany, to give his speech.
Salam Iran, Salam Ashraf. Ich freue mich, dass ich als
Salam Iran, Salam Ashraf. I speak to you on behalf of and as the chairman of the German Solidarity Committee for a Free Iran, and I'm very proud to do so. Initially, I have to say that I wanted to visit Ashraf several times in the past few months. You have really created wonders in Ashraf. We have come a long way together for the liberation of Iran. In this way, the regime has steadily weakened. We've been able to free the more than 3,500 people in Ashraf 1 and 2 and bring them to Albania in safety. Something has happened in Iran, which has happened in many other countries as well, the corona pandemic. But this inhumane regime is not doing anything to protect its people. And the regime has practically announced the end of the pandemic and has set defenseless people back to everyday life. Medical care can never be sufficient or improved because the regime rejects foreign aid, as well as that of the World Health Organization and organizations like Doctors Without Borders. Conclusion: government does not help its people. Citizen councils and self-help committees have set up help across the country. The active role of the People's Mojahedin of Iran and the National Council of Resistance of Iran, led by President Mariam Rajavi, in promoting this initiative is commendable. These social movements require our support. Regarding the economic situation, the call for sanctions to be lifted due to the corona crisis must not be met. The IMF's 4 to 5 billion loan application should not be met either. The regime has actually released billions from its religious foundations while circumventing the sanctions in order for private traders to buy and sell internationally. Almost 5 billion of the Islamic Republic's money is missing, says Iran's Supreme Court of Auditors, SAC, Director Adel Azhar. Based on the official exchange rate of 42,000 rials per dollar, the government of the Islamic Republic is distributing billions of cheaper dollars to local importers to buy essential goods overseas. Many of these importers are politically well connected. Even though, according to Supreme Court of Auditors Director Azhar, 4.8 billion were allocated, no goods or products were imported. Corruption within the Islamic Republic, black money, and mismanagement have shaken all international and national trust in this regime. In addition, the regime and its House representatives have billions on bank accounts. The regime's so-called support to battle economic hardship, poverty of around half the population, and the consequences of the pandemic are not credible and only serve the regime's own people, henchmen, and the Revolutionary Guards, or corruption. Germany and Europe should tell the International Monetary Fund that if you want to help the Iranian people with corona, the only way to help is to help independently and under international supervision and not through corrupt clerics. Dear friends, corona only makes us more determined in our goal to end the mullah dictatorship.
I'm honored to introduce to you Mr. Toby Perkins. Mr. Perkins, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. It is a great pleasure for me to be addressing people from around the world, here from Chesterfield in Derbyshire in the United Kingdom. And I very much agree with many of the comments that my parliamentary colleague David Jones has already said. But coronavirus is a huge international catastrophe that is causing misery, medical and economic catastrophe around the world. But what it also is doing is showing in all due exposure the difference between different regimes around the world. And we are very conscious that there are many governments that are struggling to handle the economic and medical problems that are caused by coronavirus, but particularly in Iran, we are seeing a regime that is hiding the truth from its own citizens, that is refusing to put social welfare measures in place to protect vulnerable people, that is refusing to ensure that people have food and the other life essentials that will enable them to protect themselves during this very grave crisis. And we are seeing a regime that, far from protecting its own people, is actually using this crisis to cause misery to people in its own communities, such as in the city of Karamabad in western Iran, where the regime forces began destructing houses built by deprived people with their own means, and beating residents not willing to leave their house, injuring several elderly regimes under the rubble of their homes. Just 2 days later, in Iran Shah, in southeastern Iran, again, the same things happen. So instead of providing people with their life essentials, this regime is destroying their houses, which are supposed to shelter the people against coronavirus. And at the same time, they are using this crisis to call for more finances that we know will only be used to prop up the regime. And we know that there are many people who are freedom fighters held in prisons in Iran that are being put in medical jeopardy because of the failure of the regime to protect the people and their willing and willful desire to undermine the health of their opponents. And so in the United Kingdom, politicians here are joining the call from around the world to show solidarity to the people of Iran and to give our support to those who fight the regime, whether they be in Iran or whether they be in the NCRI in other places around the world. They should know as they battle this appalling medical catastrophe that our thoughts and our prayers are with them, and that we will continue to show our support for the opponents of this regime, and we will continue to put pressure on the United Kingdom government and on other governments to recognise the NCRI and to continue to condemn the regime of the Iranian regime that continues to work against the interests of its own people. So from the United Kingdom, I show my support for all of the people of Iran who wish to live in a free society where the government puts the needs of the people first, as it should do at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. You mentioned the tragic incident in Khorramabad just this past week. Images from the ruthless attacks have been circulating all over social media. But as you stated, as Mrs. Rajavi has also reiterated, the massacre of Iran's freedom fighters in the past 4 decades has now been extended to the people amid the coronavirus. I think the first thought for many of us, as we saw the number of fatalities surpassing 30,000, was an immediate reminder of the 30,000 lives lost in the massacre of 1988. امروز خانم دولت نوروزی نماینده شورای ملی مقاومت در انگلیس دعوت ما رو پذیرفتن و در جلسه ما حضور دارن که از ایشون میخوام که صحبتاشون
Greetings to all compatriots, dear viewers, and especially to all supporters of the Iranian resistance, brave resistance units, and popular councils all over Iran. Let me first give my greetings to my friends in English.
From honorable members of the British Parliament and also the German Bundestag, particularly the Right Honorable David Jones, Mr. Bob Blackman MP, Mr. Toby Perkins MP, Sir Alan Neil MP, Mr. Martin Pottzelt from the German Bundestag, Mr. Thomas Nord from the German Bundestag, and also Mr. Otto Benhardt. I'm very grateful to all your support and your participation in this conference with us and for the cause of the Iranian people. باید بگم که
From the very first day, Khamenei and Rouhani were responsible for this deadly virus to Iran, especially to the city of Qom, due to the flights of Mahan Airlines owned by Revolution Guards to China for their own political and commercial interests, and they informed of the death of 2 people. As a result of the regime's deliberate cover-ups, the lack of quarantine Qom led to this massacre. On the contrary, in some other countries that for even poorer countries, the amount of the fatalities is even 50 times less than Iran. The National Council of Resistance Iran published documents that shows that some patients were admitted to hospitals. The flights of Mahan, which is owned by the Revolution Guards to China for their own political and commercial interests, have been continued up to this day. As a result of the regime's deliberate cover-ups and the lack of quarantine in Qom and the regime's political interests in hospital, this virus spread to 31 provinces in Iran. Not only the airport of Qom and the other parts of the country were infected by the virus, and that's why we are facing such a widespread spread of this virus and many deaths. Now, after 2 months, the leaders of the Iranian regime, including Pastor Jalali, say that they knew and they were aware about the entry of this deadly virus to Iran since January, and they were ready for that. With this great lie that the Iranian regime has said and all the figures fake figures that they've given, they have committed this crime against humanity, and Khomeini and Rouhani are responsible for that, and they must be held accountable before the Iranian people. According to the Iranian resistance documents, in more than 294 cities, the fatalities have reached more than 30,000, and more than 1 million have been infected by this virus. Because of the criminal act and order of Rouhani to send back the people to their business, that it has caused even more deaths and fatalities among the Iranian people. Because of their people, the regime's fear of the uprising and the rage of the people, they are covering up the number of casualties, and on the other hand, has resorted to issue classified instructions to the Revolutionary Guard, Passage Forces, the command and control center of the police station, and all police stations and checkpoints to suppress any social protests and riots, especially in prisons. Hundreds of inmates in various prisons in the country have been infected with the coronavirus due to inhuman and unsanitary conditions in the regime's prisons, and many of them have and unfortunately many of them have passed away. Mrs. Maria Rajavi has repeatedly called on the international community for the release of the prisoners, especially political prisoners, and have called all independent groups and organizations for the release of political prisoners. And also, we call all the families and friends of the prisoners to do their best and to raise their voice for saving the lives of the political prisoners and freedom of the political prisoners. This tragedy we must add to this tragedy hundreds of billions of hungry people, and there are millions of the poor, unemployed, hungry, and marginalized people at risk of being killed by the regime government. More than 500,000 working children are at risk. The assets of the Iranian people must be taken out of the hands of the organization controlled by the mullahs regime and the IRGC. The assets that belong to the people who are at such a desperate situation are facing danger. Bunyad Mustazafan, Astana Quds Razavi, and Shahid Foundation, and other organizations that belong to the Khamenei and are controlled by Khamenei, and other organizations are the ones that have always taken the wealth of the Iranian people, and they even do not pay taxes. These organizations can easily pay for the livelihood of the deprived people of Iran so they are not forced to go back to their work and not be affected by this virus. Especially that we know that this regime is not taking any measures to help the people of this regard. Mrs. Mariam Rajavi said
جوانان مجاهد و مبارز در رژیم ولایت فقیه در تابستان 67 اکنون به قتل عام مردم بیگناه در مقابل
Mrs. Rajavi, regarding the number of the fatalities and the tragedy that has passed 30,000 people, and the deplorable situation of work children and the infection of many children, that the massacre of the Mojahedin and the freedom lovers by the Velayat Faqih regime in the summer of 98 has now spread to the massacre of children of this country and all the people of Iran, especially political prisoners, due to corona tragedy. The only way out is to eradicate the ominous regime of the mullahs from our homeland. Thank you very much for your speech that tells us what to do under this situation, and the only way out is to overthrow this regime. In this part, we ask Mrs. Vida Niktalan on behalf of the Iranian society.
سلام میکنم به دوستان، یاران و
حامیان مقاومت، supporters and friends of the Iranian resistance, and especially our dear compatriots inside our homeland. And thank to you for giving me this opportunity to talk to my dear compatriots inside Iran today and tell them that in these difficult days, sometimes for many of you, we the supporters of the resistance are aware of your pain and suffering, which has multiplied with this pandemic. We are constantly following the news in the country through Simai Azadi TV and cyberspace, and every moment our hearts ache when we hear the oppression of the incompetent mullahs. We think every moment how we can reduce your pain and suffering. How can we be the voice of those
که در این موقعیت با وجود ویروس کرونا جونشون چند صد برابر در معرض خطر قرار گرفته، یا زنان بی‌سرپرست، خانواده کارگران محروم که برای تامین کمترین امکانات موجود زندگی مجبور هستند بدون داشتن کوچکترین امکان بهداشتی برای لقمه نونی به خیابونا بیان و به کار برن.
And the homeless women and the families of workers who have to look for a piece of bread without the health facilities to provide the least facilities, or how to be the voice of suffering compatriots who have to be quarantined and kept at home to protect their lives. If they stay, they will destroy their home. Now that we are under the rule of tyranny and oppression for which human beings are worthless and think only of maintaining their own power and survival, we must join and help ourselves. Our hearts beat with you every moment, and all our activities, including this conference, are for you. Although the situation is difficult and unlike other governments that are thinking of rescuing their people, the only thing that does matter to the brutal regime is the lives of the people. This oppression is not sustainable and cannot be
و خواهر مریم هستند.
We should never lose our hope as long as there are Mujahedin and the Iranian system, as long as there is a pure path like
تا زمانی که کسانی هستند که در تمامی مراحل اسارت ایران زمین جونشون رو کف دستشون گذاشتن، هر کلامی که گفتن، هر راهی که در راه مبارزه برداشتن، هر قدمی که برداشتن، با نام خلق قهرمان ایران برای آزادی، برای سلامتی و شادی ایرانی این قدم ها رو برداشتن و از مبارزه دست نکشیدن و نخواهند کشید تا زمانی که قانون‌های شورشی در خیابان‌ها مبارزه می‌کنند و تا زمانی که آرزوی رسیدن به آزادی مردم ایران در تک تک ما زنده هستش، آزادی ما در دسترسه. نباید امید رو از دست داد تا پایان با همدیگه دستها در دست هم و تکیه بر مجاهدین ایران و ایرانی رو از شر عظیم ویروس ولایت فقیه آزاد. الانم از همه دوستانی که در این کنفرانس شرکت کردن و پای خط هستن میخوام که با هم ترافت کرونای ولایت عامل قتل ملت رو بلند کنن. 1 2 3
The placard all together. کرونا ولایت فقیه cause of the
کورونای ولایت عامل قتل ملت. 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 کورونای ولایت کورونای ولایت عامل قتل ملت. عامل قتل ملت. عامل قتل ملت. عامل قتل ملت. کورونای ولایت
Greetings to all of you. I'm sure that everybody else joined your slogans from other parts of the world. Now I would like to ask Mr. Bob Blackman, a member of the UK Parliament, long-standing friend of the Iranian resistance, to give his speech.
Yes, good afternoon. Yes, good afternoon, and greetings to all my Iranian friends in Iran and around the world who are refugees from the regime of the mullahs. I'm speaking to you from a sunny Wembley because in London we're all down in lockdown and because of the coronavirus. And indeed, when Parliament reconvenes next week, we're going to be doing so remotely. So this sort of conference will be very typical of how the UK Parliament will have to operate for the next few weeks and possibly even months. So can I say first and foremost that around the world we have seen various different regimes reporting the level of infections and, very sadly, the number of deaths that have occurred because of coronavirus. Here in the UK, we've just gone past, very sadly, more than 15,000 people dying because of the coronavirus. And we've heard the misinformation coming out of China, which of course was the leader in terms of the number of deaths because of the virus. But Iran is one of those countries which refuses to admit to the scale of the virus. We understand that more than 500,000 people have been infected, and very sadly 30,000 people have died as a direct result of the coronavirus. And I, together with 50 other colleagues from the UK Parliament, both in the House of Lords and the House of Commons, have written an open letter to the United Nations calling on them to take appropriate action. Now, we know that the regime of the mullahs has been deliberately attempting to dupe everyone, and that above all else, its main purpose is actually just to continue in power at all costs. They've abused the COVID-19 pandemic, and a campaign is going on, an orchestrated campaign out of Tehran, spearheaded by the regime of the mullahs, to lift all the sanctions against the country and taking advantage of the coronavirus pandemic that continues to take Iranian lives. They plead with the world to lift the economic sanctions to save Iranian lives. But as we know, that is not the case. The international community, especially the different United Nations organizations, commissioners and rapporteurs, must not fall for this sinister campaign, which is entirely based on lies and propaganda by the regime in Iran to advance its own interests and survival. The sanctions imposed on Tehran, either by the United States, United Kingdom, or the other EU countries, are punitive measures in response to the regime's unacceptable support for terrorism, destabilizing activities in the region, pursuit of illicit and clandestine nuclear and missile programs, as well as the serious human rights violations and killings at home. There's no doubt whatsoever that they are still involved in trying to seek to obtain nuclear weapons and other weapons of incredible destructiveness. Now, lifting the sanctions at the moment will do nothing to help the Iranian people. Far from it. They will assist the regime to increase its unacceptable behavior at home and abroad by continuing the domestic crackdown and by their continuing export of terrorism abroad. All evidence on the ground, as we've heard, and I agree with what my parliamentary colleagues have already said, that the realities in Iran indicate that the paramilitary terrorist force, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, will be the main beneficiary of any sanction relief granted to Iran, given its massive control over Iran's economy and the import and export of the country. So we've signed an open letter, which has been sent by the British Committee for Iran Freedom to the United Nations Secretary General. It's initiated by my good friend and colleague, Professor Lord Alton of Liverpool, who I've known for now more than 40 years. It was also signed by other independent crossbenchers, by members of all political parties in the Houses of Parliament, and up to 50 other members of the UK Parliament have signed this letter. The letter urges the United Nations Secretary General to pressure the regime and the Iranian authorities to free all political prisoners and dual citizens held unjustly in Iran without any conditions or delay. And that, of course, includes many UK citizens who are held unjustly in Iranian jails, such as Nazarene Zaghari-Ratcliffe. Secondly, to pressure the regime and the Iranian authorities to reveal the true extent of the coronavirus pandemic and the number of deaths in Iran in order to help the international community and the NGOs to understand the crisis and to assist the Iranian people appropriately. And finally, take immediate action in coordination with the relevant United Nations organizations and United Nations member states to monitor and supervise the medical and financial aid package which has already been sent to Iran, to make sure that the aid truly goes to the Iranian people and to those infected and is not stolen by the IRGC and domestic mafias which are close to the Supreme Leader and his faction. The reality is that in order to ensure that the aid that we're freely giving to the people of Iran reaches the people of Iran, these three actions are absolutely vital, because we know that the regime of the mullahs and the IRGC will take any action necessary to suppress and oppress the people of Iran. So my final words are, please stay safe, stay secure, and together, not only will we overcome coronavirus, but we'll also overcome the regime of the mullahs, and we look forward to a free Iran and all of us being able to meet in Tehran to celebrate the freedom in Iran.
خیلی For those who have just joined us, this is an online internet conference where over 1,000 people and political speakers have joined this online conference. I hope you are enjoying this, and I'm aware that you are all following this very closely. I now ask Mr. Thomas Nord from Germany, a member of parliament from that country.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here. I congratulate my friends of Ashraf 3 and the Iranian resistance that we have this opportunity to come together and speak. We don't know much about what's really going on inside Iran. What we do know is the information we get from our friends of the Iranian resistance. And we, as supporters and friends of the Iranian resistance, take this opportunity to distribute this information across our own organizations. I want to emphasize that we have not forgotten you despite these times of corona. And we know that you have always been having difficult times and producing the best results in these times. And we know that you're trying to help the poorest of the poor inside Iran and to build up committees, people's committees inside Iran to help people help themselves these activities that you are undertaking in Iran is a good opportunity to prove to the Iranian people that they have to take their concerns and matters in their own hands and that they will succeed. And I'm happy to be able to keep contact with you in times of Corona by these means and help you advance your agenda in Iran.
How beautiful said that coronavirus and Mullah's regime have one thing in common, that's their inhumane nature. And now ask Mr. Martin Passelt from Germany to deliver his speech.
I'm saluting all my Iranian friends now sitting in front of their cameras and computers. Indeed, the Iranian people are fighting on two fronts for the right to live, against the coronavirus and against the misanthropic mullahs. The mullahs' balance sheet is summarized in obfuscation, inaction, corruption, and oppression. Coronavirus and the mullahs are on a common front against Iranian citizens, and therefore the mullahs have to go. One criterion for the regime's misanthropy is how it deals with the prisoners. Corona has reached almost all of Iranian prisons. The disastrous hygiene conditions in the prisons have made the prisons slaughterhouses. Amnesty International reports the rebellion of thousands of people in at least 8 Iranian prisons against the regime's inaction related to the coronavirus threat. The Iranian regime's response was only excessive use of force. At least 30 prisoners are said to have been shot with machine guns. Dozens of prisoners managed to escape from prisons to protect their lives from the deadly coronavirus, including political prisoner Mustafa Salimi, who had spent 17 years in the dictator's prisons and fled Saqqez prison in western Iran. It is outrageous and is to be strongly condemned that after Mustafa was arrested again, the regime immediately executed him without trial. The European Union and the High Commissioner for Human Rights and the Secretary General of the UN and the relevant international bodies must pressure the Iranian regime to release or quarantine all prisoners because the corona is widespread in prisons. This is a matter of serious international concern, and we have to be the voice of these prisoners. The human rights, general social, and especially medical situation in Iran has deteriorated dramatically. The state denies people the necessary medical care and sends them back to daily life. All necessary contact restrictions, work bans, etc., which are necessary to protect human life, have been lifted. It is very hideous that the Rouhani government is putting up with corona victims on a large scale because it does not want to pay people from the treasury. Here are corona and the mullahs on the same front. But what is the solution? The solution could be anything except surrender. The National Council of Resistance of Iran and the PMOI have called for solidarity among people and for mutual help. Protecting the lives of citizens is a top priority for a genuine and legitimate resistance. We found that every time we met Ms. Mariam Mojahedin, there is a great power in the solidarity and unity of the people. The power of victory over corona and the clerical dictatorship. We support this resistance for freedom and for saving people's lives.
In this part, I would like to ask Mr. Alan Mill, a member of European Council, to deliver his speech.
Yeah, can you hear me now? Yes, I'm sorry about the delay there. Can I first of all thank you for allowing me to participate today. It's very, very important. Those of us who are long-standing supporters of the opposition in Iran have found it very, very difficult for many, many years to get information out of the country about what was actually going on. And it's only through the good offices of the opposition in the United Kingdom and elsewhere in Europe that have been helped in this regard. And I'd like just for a couple of seconds to pay tribute to those Iranians who are in the United Kingdom who supply us and keep us up to date with that materials. Can I today really echo the three excellent speeches that have been made by my colleagues from the United Kingdom, Bob Blackman, David Jones and Toby Perkins, who made excellent speeches and addresses about the situation regarding Iran and also the problem over coronavirus. Now, I remember at the beginning of the whole of this issue, when coronavirus evolved, what happened was that the Iranian regime denied that there was any difficulties in Iran about this particular illness. That was at the start. They then moved to a situation to say that it was only a minor problem. And then in the end, they said they had everything under control. Now, if you look at the figures which have been expressed earlier, the collective death rate in Iran so far is almost equal to the death rates in Northern Europe in total, not singularly in countries like United Kingdom, Germany, France, Belgium, and so on, but actually totally, inclusive of that particular figure, which shows you how serious it was in that regard. And I think what that points to is what's being pointed out by a number of the speakers so far, is the uncaring situation with the present regime in Iran, but also its incompetence in dealing with major problems. Now, we're not talking about a country that's just got into issues and is suffering from financial difficulties. We have one of the richest countries in the world, and yet on its own figures at the present time, we have 59 million Iranians living in Iran, 59 million living in poverty. That's a serious situation indeed. And as Davy Jones said a little bit earlier, this led just a few months ago to riots in 191 cities throughout Iran. 191 cities. I say that if that happened in any other country in the world, it showed what kind of a serious situation the government was in there. And what happened in response to it, the government didn't listen in regard to such an outburst of opposition in the country. They actually took action. They took action by arresting thousands of people and actually in the process killing 1,500 people, many of them young adults and some children. That's a situation that can't be endorsed and supported by any decent government in the world. Now, what I want to express is my belief that Western governments need to be very, very careful indeed about the situation with Iran. Yes, the $5 billion which has been requested needs to be put forward, but it has to have a strict mandate on that. It must be not paid direct to the government itself of Iran, but rather it should be paid to the United Nations, who in cohesion with the WHO and other organizations led by them could actually take the money and use it so that it hits the area of need. I don't want a situation to evolve again whereby monies of this amount goes into Iran directly, and therefore which will inevitably, as said by Bob Blackman in particular and others, it bypasses the need and goes instead to the regime itself. And that means the Revolutionary Guard, a Revolutionary Guard that's already killed thousands, tens of thousands of people and is arrested and jailed many, many more. Now, it's a barbaric regime, whether it's Khomeini, Rouhani, or the rest of it. It's a barbaric. And the kind of things that are happening in this regime would be unacceptable in any other country in the world. And I want to be no part of anything in that regard. What I want to see out of this conference, what I want to see out of the UN, the World Bank, and the WHO is a bit of common sense so that we say, enough is enough. What we have to do is help the people of Iran to get over this particular thing and build for a better future and a better Iran. As I say, it takes an international response to actually get some kind of respite for the people in Iran. But do not pave the way for this regime to go on and do what it's been doing in the last few years. What is happening out there is unacceptable, but we have to ensure that the people of Iran are the beneficiaries and not the Iranian government. Thank you.
We would like to ask Vahide Khorramrouei from Canada to deliver her speech. Vahide, please go ahead.
با سلام و درود
Greeting
فراوان
to
به
my
هموطنان
dear
عزیزم در داخل
compatriots
ایران و
inside
هر
Iran
جایی که
and everywhere
هستند
else.
و با درودهای
And
بیکران به
with
پزشکان و
endless
پرستاران و
greetings to
تمامی
doctors
کادرهای
and
درمانی در
nurses and all
ایران
medical
که
staff in
با
Iran
فداکاری
who are
های
trying
قابل
to
تقدیر
save
در
the
پی
lives
نجات
of
جان
our
هموطنانمون هستند.
compatriots with
ما
commendable
میدونیم که
sacrifice.
رژیم آمار
We
دروغ
know
از
that the regime
مبتلایان و
gives false
جانباختگان در ایران
figures
میده
on
و
the
از
number
دادن
of
کمترین کمک
people
ها به
killed
مردم
and infected in Iran and refuses
امتناع
to give the
میکنه
list
و
to the
میلیاردها
people
دلار رو که
and spends
متعلق به
billions
مردم
of
ایرانی
dollars of
صرف
belongings
جنگ
of the Iranian people
افروزی های خودش
on
میکنه
its
و یا
own
جیب آخوندهای
wars
فاسد رو
or
پر میکنه.
goes to the pockets of
همچنین میدونیم که این
We also
رژیم
know that
مینیموم
this
امکانات
regime
پزشکی
does
رو
not
در
provide minimum
اختیار
medical
پزشکان و
facilities
کادرهای
to Iranian
ایران قرار
doctors and
نمیده
medical staff.
و به جاش
and
به پاسدارها
instead
و بسیجی
it
ها
gives
و
the
دلغک‌های
revolutionary guard
خودش به قول
and
معروف
passages
امداد رسانی میکنه برای
to
این
hold
مسخره
their
بازی هاشون در خیابون،
ridiculous
نمایشات و مسخره
shows
بازی هاشون
in
در
the
خیابون های
streets.
ایران. در حال من قصد دارم حرفایی که سایر دوستان اینجا زدن،
Well, I'm
مخصوصا
not going to
آقای دیوید
repeat what
جونز، باب
other
بلکمن
friends
و
are
در
saying
آخر آقای
here,
سر آلن میل که خیلی
like
جالب
Mr. Allen,
همه نقاط و نکته ها رو فرمودن،
who
به اضافه اون خانم دولت
said
نوروزی که
his
کاملا
points and
متن
Miss
داستان رو و
Dolat
شرایط ایران
Norouzi.
رو گفتن. تکرار کنم، فقط میخوام از این فرصت استفاده کنم و صدای هموطنانم رو
I
که
just
به جامعه جهانی
want
برسونم
to take this
و
opportunity
انتظار اونا رو بیان کنم.
for my
در این
compatriots
شرایط
who hear my voice
در
and
این شرایط
express their
سخت
demands
مردم ما از جامعه بین‌المللی
and
انتظار
call
دارن
to
که
the
این رژیم رو
international
به خاطر
community.
پنهانکاریاش در مورد
In these
آمار
difficult times, our
جانباختگان
people
کرونا مورد
expect the
حسابرسی
international
قرار بده.
community to
چطور میتونیم
hold
آمار
accountable
رو
the regime
در
for
کشوری
its cover-ups
باور
over the
کرد
death
که
toll from
کمترین اقدام رو
coronavirus?
برای
How
جلوگیری
can
از
these
شیوع
figures
بیماری
be
و
believed in a
قرنطینه
country
کردن مردم
that does not
نمیکنه
take
و تازه
the slightest
خامنه‌ای
action to prevent the
جنایتکار
spread
که
of
خودش
disease
همواره
and
با
corrupt
دستکش و
people?
با تمام ضوابط میاد توی تلویزیون حکم
And
صادر
only
میکنه که
this
اجساد
comedy
جان
who
باختگان
always
رو
goes
جان
through
باختگان کرونا رو باید
the
غسل کرد.
bodies of coronavirus victims should
مردم
be
ما از جامعه
washed.
بین‌المللی انتظار دارن
Our
که
people
رژیم
expect
فاسد آخوندی
the
رو مورد
international community
حسابرسی قرار
to
بدن،
hold the
چرا که ثروت
regime accountable.
میلیاردی مردم ایران که در
Why the
دست
$1 billion
خامنه‌ای است
worth of the
در این
wealth
شرایط سخت
which
برای
is in the
بهداشت
hands
و
of
سلامت
Khamenei is not being
استفاده
spent
نمیشه
on the
و
health
بلکه
of the
در جیب این
people
پاسدارها و آخوندهای خودش
as going to the pockets
میریزه.
of the mullahs.
ما در کل در جامعه جهانی انتظار داریم که رژیم فاطمه خادری را همونجور که گفتم مورد حسابرسی قرار بده.
As I said,
سازمان
we
بهداشت
asked
جهانی
the
و
World
گزارشگران
Health Organization and the
سلامتی سازمان ملل باید به
United Nations Health
لب به سخن باز کنند و از
rapporteur
رژیم
should
بپرسند که
speak
چرا
out
این
and
تیم‌های
ask the
پزشکی
regime
بدون
why it
سازمان بدون مرز رو
expelled
پزشکان
the
بدون
teams
مرز رو که
of
به کمک
Doctors Without
مردم ایران رفته
Borders
بودن رو اخراج
who
کردند
went to help
و
the
چرا
Iranian
به
people,
کمک‌های خارجی
and
اجازه
why it does not
ورود
allow foreign
به ایران رو نمیدن.
countries to come to Iran and
جامعه
help the
بین‌المللی
people.
باید بدونه که
The
هر گونه
international
مماشات و دوستی با این
community
رژیم از چشم ما دور
and
نخواهد موند.
all
و
governments,
در
especially the
پایان
European
میخوام
governments, must know
بگم که
that the
مردم
Iranian people
ما
do
ستم
not
زده و غارت شده
want
هستند
this
ولی
regime.
آگاهن و خیلی خوب میفهمن که تک به تک دولت ها با
The
رژیمی
people
که
are
دشمن
aware
ملت ایران
and they know that
هست چه
what
برخوردی میکنن.
governments are
مردم
doing
ما
with
و
the regime that is
مقاومت
the enemy of the
طرفدارشون
Iranian
فقط
people.
برخورد قاطع با این رژیم رو مشروع میدونن و
The only
دست دادن با
legitimate
اون رو
approach
با این
toward this
رژیم رو در
regime is
هر
a firm
شرایطی محکوم
stance
میکنن
against it.
و در
Our
برابرش
people
میستن.
condemn any
با تشکر
appeasement
از
policy
همه شما که به صحبت‌های من گوش
have been
دادید و با
annihilated.
درود
Thanks to
بی‌کران
all of you who listened to
مردم
me and with warm
میهنم
greetings
در
to
ایران.
my compatriots inside Iran.
stand with Maryam Rajavi. I stand with Maryam Rajavi. I stand with Maryam Rajavi.
Thanks to all of you. We are at the end of our program, and we appreciate all participants to this conference. We appreciate the honored personalities who spent their time in this conference, and we hope a free Iran. And thank you all supporters of the Iranian resistance who from different parts of the world and participate in this conference. Undoubtedly, we will increase our activities in this regard, and we thank all the viewers who inside Iran and abroad were with us. The only answer to all these crimes is the overthrow of the regime, and the message of the leader of resistance who said that we should make our struggle against the regime 100 times more. And thank you for making the hashtag TikTok for overthrowing the regime. Thank you again, and hoping for the overthrow of the regime at the end.